All set.
Thank you. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yeah, the sound is fine. Thank you. Sorry to keep you waiting, but of course we had some technical issues to solve on the very last minute. So thank you again for joining our today's event. This is first part of the two-day event organized by the Center of Migration Research at the University of Warsaw. My name is Kamila Fełkowska, and together with Agnieszka Radziwnowiczówna and Karolina Łukasiewicz, we have a pleasure of putting the whole thing together, preparing and moderating today's and tomorrow's seminar, which is under the joint title Humanitarian Crisis at the Polish-Belarusian Frontier, Old and New Diagnoses from the External EU Borders. This first part of today is named Polish, Greek and Balkan Border Crisis, Pushbacks Policy and Human Rights Violations. And few technicalities before I introduce our panelists. So as you were already informed, this webinar is recorded and finally also live streamed on Facebook. The recording will be also later uploaded on our YouTube page and on our website. And I will also share a screen to show you the QR code, which will lead you directly to the website. But I also need to be made a co-host to make this happen. So please make me a co-host. The discussion will be moderated by Agnieszka. But if you have any questions and comments during and after the presentation, please post them in the chat box. And also please make sure that you introduce yourself so that we know where you're from and what is your affiliation or institutional affiliation. As we are now at our panelists, I would like to very briefly, can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can see your screen. You can go full screen.
So you should be able to see it from the beginning. Welcome again. And I would like to introduce very briefly our speakers. So basically the idea for this roundtable was to gather people who are having first-hand experience on documenting human rights violations on the external borders of the European Union. These are both activists and researchers. And this roundtable also served to exchange the experiences of researchers documenting this border violence on the Polish-Belarusian border, on the Greek-Turkey border, but also along the Balkan route. During this roundtable, some of the most important findings of two recently published reports will be discussed, and we will post the links to those reports also in the chat box. So I would like to welcome and thank you for joining us, Witold Klaus, who is a professor at the Polish Academy of Sciences, also involved in the border group, and a research fellow at the Center of Migration Research. Thank you, Witold, for joining us today. I also want to welcome warmly Marta Górczyńska, human rights lawyer, activist of the border group, migration researcher, and a PhD candidate at the University of Warsaw. Thank you, Marta. I also welcome Eleni Toku, who is a co-founder and deputy director of the Greek NGO Human Rights 360, and Chloe Powers from Border Violence Monitoring Network, a researcher, activist, and visual artist based in Athens. We will be also joined in a discussion by Evgenia Koniaki, who is also a lawyer at Human Rights 360. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today for what we are sure will be an important contribution to discussion on border crisis, including the most recent one on the Polish-Belarusian border. And without further ado, I give floor to Agnieszka, who will be moderating today's discussion.
Thank you very much, Kamila. I would just like to ask you to change the slide and go full screen if possible, because what we can see on the screen is just the first slide. I don't know why Zoom is not very cooperative, and my apologies for this. If you go,
do you see it right now?
If you can go to the third slide, because now we can see the fourth.
That's the third slide.
We can see the number 4 with the introduction of the border group.
Is that one that you want to see now?
Nope, not really. Let me try to share my screen and perhaps.
It's cooperating very well.
Can you confirm that you can see agenda slide? My apologies for this. Zoom for some strange reason is not very cooperative, but hopefully no more hiccups for today. So the agenda for today is as follows. We will start with presentation from our guest speakers, and we would like to present the situation in Poland because of the current situation. So we will start with the presentation from Grupa Granica, which could be translated as the border group. Then we will have a presentation from colleagues from Greece, from Human Rights 360. That will be followed by the presentation from Border Violence Monitoring Network. And what will follow then will be the roundtable with questions and answers from all the participants. And finally, we want to allocate a decent amount of time for the questions and answers, comments from the public. So please make sure that you write your question or comment in the chat box, and we will read them out. So without further ado, I would like to invite the first speakers. Witold Klaus is a professor at the Institute of Law Studies, Polish Academy of Sciences, and a research fellow in the Center of Migration Research here at the University of Warsaw. He's a lawyer, criminologist, migration researcher, and activist. He was one of the founders of the board for the Association for Legal Intervention. And Marta Górczyńska is human rights lawyer, migration researcher, and a PhD candidate in legal studies at the University of Warsaw, specializing in the field of international and EU law on asylum and migration. She has been a team member and coordinator of monitoring missions to the borders and detention facilities for migrants. Witold and Marta, you have 15 minutes to answer some of these questions, please. How is a border and humanitarian crisis produced in the case of Poland-Belarus? What do you see as the crucial moments defining the state response to the crisis? What is the significance of the geographic and meteorological conditions in border deterrence? Low temperatures, the forest, in the Polish case. How do you see the neighborly cooperation with Lithuania and the reaction of the supranational institutions, such as European Union? And finally, we would like to ask you about the civil society response. The floor is yours. Now I will stop sharing my screen so that you can share your slides, please.
Hello, everybody. We agreed with Witek that I will start with presenting the situation at the border, telling you briefly about the origins of the crisis and about the state response. And then Witek will continue with the response of the civil society. We'll try to answer all the questions that you asked, but in 15 minutes, we have to be very brief with that. So let me start with the very short presentation that we prepared, actually more to just show you some pictures, because they will allow you to see how the situation looks like on the ground. I have to share my screen, I guess, and just please confirm that you can see it.
Yes, if you want, you can go full screen. Perfect.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So briefly about the origins of the border crisis. As you probably know, already in May, Belarusian leader Lukashenko announced that, and I'm quoting here, he will send illegal migrants to the EU's borders in a response to the sanctions that were imposed on Belarus after the repressions of the civil society after the presidential elections last August. And that's what we like I'm saying, that was announced very openly by Lukashenko. And then Belarus started issuing visas to people from the countries such as Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, but also Yemen, the Democratic Republic of Congo. So for people who normally would have very little chances of obtaining visas to Europe, even though a lot of them seek for or would like to seek for international protection. A lot of them come from unstable countries with mass human rights violations. So for them, this migration route via Belarus was very often used as a way of fleeing the country from persecutions, with the intention to seek for asylum, to seek for international protection in the EU. What we saw at the beginning of the crisis, which was already confirmed by also Frontex and then Polish and Lithuanian and Latvian border guards, was that Belarusian authorities were and still are orchestrating the movement of people from the airport in Minsk to the border with EU, and then forcing people to cross the border to the neighboring countries. This practice is very brutal, which means that once people are at the border with EU, they have no way back. Belarusian authorities are and Belarusian border guards and military officers are forcing people with beatings, with kicking them, pushing them, threatening them, separating the families on the way, and forcing them to cross the border to Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia. What's the most problematic here, and that's what I will focus on here, it's the response of the Polish state. So from the very beginning, we see that the response to what started happening at our border was the militarization of the border. Very quickly, the state of emergency was introduced. It was already on the 2nd of September, when under the regulation of the president of Poland and the introduction of the state of emergency, NGOs and media were banned from entering the border zone. Actually, the only people who were allowed to enter the zone within the 3 kilometers from the border were the residents of the local villages and the military. So very quickly after the beginning of the crisis, we had a zone where no access was provided, not only for journalists who could report on the situation, but also for humanitarian organizations who could provide assistance to migrants. The military narrative was used with the razor wire fence that was very quickly also set on the Polish-Belarusian border, very heavy army presence. So there were at some point even up to 30,000 military officers sent to the border to, as it was claimed by the government, to not even protect the border, to defend the border against the migrants who tried to come into Europe, into Poland and into the EU. And this was, like I'm saying, the response to the groups of migrants who were sent by Belarusians or forced by Belarusians to cross the border into Poland. But with a lot of them actually seeking for international protection and trying to claim for asylum in front of Polish officers. We've documented a lot of cases with people being illegally pushed back to Belarus. So with people whose asylum applications were ignored and not examined by the Polish authorities, but instead they were taken to the military trucks and escorted back to the borderline and then forced to cross the border to the Belarusian side. It happened very often, multiple times for one person or one family. So it was, and it still is, although in a smaller scale, like border ping pong with people being pushed back from Poland to Belarus, and then Belarusian would force these people to cross the border to Poland again with no way out, with no possibility to go back to Minsk, with no possibility to go back into the Belarusian territory, and no possibility to go out of this, what actually turned out to be a death trap for them. Also, very quickly, the amendments to national law were introduced by Polish Parliament, which allowed for every person who's apprehended right after crossing the border in an irregular manner to be escorted back to the borderline. The decision right now on returning migrant can be issued immediately, with no due process, with no procedural guarantees, and no right to effective remedy, since this decision is immediately enforceable with no suspensive effect. Also, the law was introduced according to which the asylum applications might be left without examination as to their merits. And these are the provisions that were introduced first in some of them in August, then some of them in October this year, with a clear violation of EU and international law, which was pointed out not only by the civil society but also by the Polish Ombudsman, UNHCR, and other international organizations which commented on this new law. So the response of the Polish government was basically to legalize or try to legalize pushbacks, not registering people who cross the border from Belarus to Poland, push them back to Belarus with the violation of their rights. So what we are witnessing on the ground since the beginning of August is the state-sanctioned pushback policy with migrants coming from countries like Syria, like Iraq or Afghanistan. So from the countries which in principle can, the people from this country can qualify for international protection, or at least they should be given a chance to present their cases, present their claims, but instead they're being pushed back from one side to another. So this leads to a human drama that we are witnessing at the border. Vitek will say a bit more about the geography of the region. It's very difficult to navigate through, with a lot of people hiding in the woods, with the temperatures right now dropping to even down to minus 10 degrees Celsius at night, with obviously no proper shelter, no right equipment to be stranded in the forest for days or for weeks, with no access to food, no access to clean water, and no way out, actually, since being apprehended by the Polish border guards does not end up with launching the asylum proceedings, but instead in sending people back to Belarus. We had a lot of cases, and a lot of cases were documented where families were separated, with parts of the families being pushed back to Belarus, while parts being admitted to the hospitals or taken to the border guard stations. We had cases of unaccompanied minors who were lost in the forests or left in the forest, and their family members were separated from them. So from the very beginning, we are talking about, and we also wrote a report recently in which we point out to the violations, very serious violations of international law, such as the right to seek asylum, the non-refoulement principle, so not being returned to danger. And Belarus should definitely right now be considered as a dangerous country, as a country to which nobody should be sent. And the prohibition of torture and inhuman treatment, as I'm saying, people who are stuck in the forest are deprived of basic humanitarian assistance, since no humanitarian organizations were allowed to enter the zone. They're deprived of medical assistance, even if they are in need, and they are left there in this life-threatening and dire conditions, especially right now with the temperatures, like I'm saying, dropping to below zero, with no assistance provided by state whatsoever. The only, like I'm saying, the only treatment that they get from the Polish authorities right now is being sent back to Belarus. And I will finish my part on that. I will leave it for Vitek to talk a bit about the response of the civil society, and I hope I will maybe tell a bit more in the question round. Thank you.
Thanks, Marta. Could you please take the slides? I mean, what was the, maybe to the next one even, what was the response of the civil society? I mean, it was the legal solutions, as Marta explained, created a landscape and defined the boundaries of the assistance that civil society organizations responded to. So because of the legal boundaries and settlement, we know what we could do and what we and what we couldn't, what we should do actually to save people's life, because as Marta said, the government stepped down from their role as a provider of safety to everyone who is on the territory of Poland. Where we could enter and where we couldn't, and also how we should protect people asking for assistance, because there are two, as you see, two different types of assistance. First of all, and the most of all, is humanitarian assistance, providing food, providing shelter, or clothes, more than a shelter, providing some medicine, providing some medical assistance also, but providing some legal assistance if possible. But along with that, we should remember that this help that was offered by NGOs and is offered by volunteers, by activists, should not expose those people to the authorities because of the risk of illegal expulsions. I mean, I refuse to use the term pushback. I think there are illegal expulsions, and then this term actually refers better to the situation than more or less neutral term pushback. So all of that actually mobilized local residents to act. They show what is going on. They show that from the 2nd of September into this state of exception, no one could enter except of them. So they need to be there. They need to offer some assistance. So it created a kind of social movement. It started in mid-August by several NGOs who had a history of working together, and then very quickly invited some other NGOs to work together on the humanitarian issues, and then some other activists and local residents joined to the group. So now it's not an NGO movement; it's really social movement where everyone is involved. This movement is huge. It's several hundred of people involved there. Sorry.
Someone hasn't muted.
Yeah, the movement is quite effective. So we could reach most of the people who are in need and provide them some assistance in a quite effective manner and without exposing them, or most of them, to the authorities. The problem is that we act against government and against governmental policy. We act underground. We are hiding from the authorities, and of course, authorities are not neutral towards the movement. We have number of documented actions to persecute activists, mostly informally, by stopper search missions, to disturb the assistant to make life of activists harder and much more difficult. But we also have reported some violence from the authorities. from the military, mostly destroying cars. Some accusations that were made against some activists, they are false. They don't have any substance there. But nevertheless, they are there. They are made to threaten people or to discourage them to help. So the idea is to for the chilling effect of those actions. And only yesterday, actually, we recorded the police raid on one of the base that was that is acting on the border and provides some assistance to immigrants. So the computers and phones were confiscated by the police. There were a number of police officers with guns there. There were interrogations that were all night long. There was accusation, of course, of facilitation illegal border crossing. So we don't know how it ends because it was, as I said, happened this night only. But we are afraid that it could be a start for some further actions. And there actually this kind of action put in danger a lot of people who help on the border and who will to help people there. So I think I'll stop here because I think my time is expired already. So thanks.
Thank you very much, Vito. Thank you very much, Marta, for this first presentation. Now I would like to share my screen again, and we will continue with the second presentation. The second presentation is by Eleni Takou. Eleni represents Human Rights 360 organization from Greece, from the Evros region. Eleni is co-founder and deputy director of the Greek NGO Human Rights 360. During 2015, she served as chief of staff of the Minister for Migration Policy in Greece. Prior to this, she has been coordinating the Racist Violence Recording Network, a coalition of CSOs under the auspices of the UNHCR office in Greece and the Greek National Commission for Human Rights. Her work is focused on refugee protection, migration, hate crime, strategic communication, and anti-racism advocacy. Eleni, I know that you would like to start with a video. Just let me know when you want me to share it.
Thank you, Agnieszka. Just to jump in and say hello to everybody. I'm really happy to be here to draw these parallels with the situation that's happening in the borders with Poland and Belarus. So we are working as you said, in the Evros region. The Evros is the land border of Greece and of EU with Turkey. We have a team on the ground running psychosocial and legal support to newcomers, and we're also running a border monitoring component. Evros has been a place of pushbacks for quite some time. So this comes hand in hand with the process of militarization of border control throughout the last decades. So this process, as this process went on, the process of intensification of pushbacks is also going on. Yes, we will start with a video. If you can just drop it, so that's it's the best introduction.
Of course, please bear with me.
Thank you.
Decade, migrants crossing from Turkey to Greece in search for EU protection routinely testified to being detained, beaten, and forcefully expelled to Turkey. Commonly known as a pushback, this practice violates both European and international law. Epic brain for this action is the Evros River, which maps the land border between Turkey and Greece. The border is densely fortified. Greek is populated by a network of police stations, outposts, fences, anti-tank boats, minefields, and watchtowers. Border operations are jointly coordinated with Frontex, the European Border and Coastal Agency. The most access to the border zone is granted to civilians, journalists, and humanitarian organizations. Local European authorities are able to continuously combine these In November 2018, forensic architecture traveled to Athens to interview 4 witnesses who had experienced pushbacks by Greek and other European agents on the Evros marriage border region. Because they found personal documents.
I assume the sound is not good.
Yes, this is what we will try.
So I can just use it as an introduction, but if it's not possible,
No, I think now the sound should be better. Let me.
So this is a work for us, as long as you're trying to do the technicalities. This is a work we've been trying to do with forensic architecture, which is a lab in Goldsmiths trying to evidence, to create more evidence of the pushback situation. So maybe now it's
In
better.
November 2019, forensic architecture traveled to Athens to interview 4 witnesses who had experienced pushbacks by Greek and other European agents at the Evros marriage border region. Because their phones and personal documents were confiscated or thrown in the river, there was little evidence of this practice beyond their testimony.
Bir tane polis memuru, telefonlarınız mı dedi, nehre attı telefonunu. İkimizinkini de.
We used architectural and gaming software to help witnesses reconstruct their experiences.
It was like U-shape on the top.
There was also another one from the other
Yeah,
side.
and it's go to like that.
The witnesses described buildings they were held in,
طلع لبرا ما في المقطوع عنا المي ومقطوع عنا كل شيء.
vehicles they were transported in, river landscapes that they were forced to cross,
بس كله كان في شجر هون تعدي من بين الأشجار كان في تحتنا ندوس على شجر مكسر ندوس على أشياء.
and weather conditions, as well as the attire and gear of the operatives pushing them back. The process of reconstruction called situated testimony helped them remember more details from their experiences.
This is Ferris, I'm sure.
Using satellite images, maps, official documents, videos and photographs, and meteorological data, we were able to corroborate these testimonies and identify some of the places and actors involved, including Greek police, border guards and military, and sometimes civilians and foreign-speaking personnel.
في كانوا هنا ألمان كانوا واقفين اثنين يحكوا.
Mapping out the paths of these 4 witnesses as they entered Greece and were repeatedly expelled demonstrates that pushbacks in the region are both systematic and widespread. People who are arrested and detained in the region are denied access to due process, their possessions and papers are confiscated, they are exposed to harsh weather conditions, and are often subjected to physical violence by various agents.
Like that in the ground. Ve tekneye biner binmez kafamı teknenin zeminine bastırdılar.
Pushbacks continue to occur because they are carried out in the dark, outside the law and the public eye. Yet these testimonies describe a widespread practice that weaponizes the natural geography and denies people the right to safety.
So very quickly, because you can see everything in the website, I think this is an introduction to what we have been facing in Greece for at least 2 decades now. So along with the militarization of border control of the Greek border, which is EU border actually, so it's an EU policy that's been implemented there. We have a continuous intensification of the operation of pushbacks. What we have been recording for the testimonies of people who have been pushed back is a modus operandi. Very specific. People are trying to cross the Evros River. They're being apprehended by the police or other forces or other armed forces. They're being they are gotten to detention facilities that might be police station or even other kind of detention facilities that are kind of of the books detention facilities that are being held for several hours. They of course endure physical violence. They are sometimes stripped. Their personal items are being confiscated. Also, of course, their mobile phones and anything that can record footage. And when the night comes, they are being they got them back to the river and push them back through the Evros region back to Turkey. This is a modus operandi widespread for years now. Of course, it has been widespread in the sense that it's not just being pushbacks. It's as my colleagues before said, it's also illegal deportation in the sense that we even have abductions and enforced disappearances from city centers of asylum seekers. So I'm trying to give you the overview and the scale of the situation. It's not just something that happens on the border. It's also people getting disappear from Thessaloniki or Athens and are found afterwards in Turkey. So we're talking about enforced illegal expulsions actually. Legal redress is very, very difficult because, as you understand, Evros is a very, is a militarized buffer zone. People are their mobile phones are being confiscated, so nothing resembling as footage or evidence is easy to find. We, as Human Rights 360, are pursuing some cases of strategic litigation in this sense. So we have a couple of cases pending before the ICCPR and another case pending before the ECHR, but things are very difficult because data are not there to begin with because of all the problems that I have already described. Just to try and finish very quickly because I'm aware of time, the parallels that one can draw from what is now happening in the borders of Poland and Belarus are quite vivid, in the sense that for us, when we were hearing the situation, but also the narrative around the situation, it was something, we thought a rehearsal was made in the Evros back in 2020. So I remind, the crisis at the border where Erdogan stated that he will not anymore stop Syrian refugees from coming to Greece, a big crisis at the borders where the same phrasing was actually tested for the first time. So the hybrid war and the instrumentalization and all that. So it was tested there, and the framing is very, very important and very dangerous. And I'm ending with that because if there's a hybrid war using refugees and migrants as ammunition, if it's a war and migrants under ammunition, then any kind of violation is doable. It's something that can happen. So migration management equals national defense, and the situation that we saw in Evros back in 2020 resembles, in quite a few details, actually, in the sense that the access to asylum was also postponed for a month, which I didn't know that is also happening in Poland. So I see that the resemblances are many. And this is something that we will start facing from now on in several regions across, the Schengen border. So these are a few first remarks from myself. Thank you again for inviting me.
Thank you very much, Eleni. And now we will continue with the third organization. I would like to present. I would like to present Chloe Powers, who is from Border Violence Monitoring Network. Just a second. So Chloe is a researcher, activist, and visual artist based in Athens, Greece. Her research interests include borders and border securitization, prisons and insurgent mobilities, citizenships, and city-making practices. Chloe holds an academic background in anthropology and feminist studies. Aside from this, she is involved in self-organized mutual aid, feminist, and anti-eviction structures in Athens, Greece. Chloe, the floor is yours.
Fantastic. The same themes and kind of topics that were brought up by the other presenters. Thank you all so much for this. But maybe first start out with a very brief introduction to the Border Violence Monitoring Network, which is the organization with which I'm here today. So the Border Violence Monitoring Network is an independent network and horizontal structure made up of NGOs and small associations across the Balkan region and in Greece that focuses on monitoring human rights violations at the external borders of the European Union and advocating to stop violence against people on the move. BVMN was created in 2016 when several NGOs and independent activists became aware of the presence of pushbacks of asylum seekers along the Balkan region and in Greece. From this point, the network has evolved quite a lot in terms of developing a common framework for the collection of firsthand testimonies and other supporting evidence on instances of pushbacks and other forms of border violence throughout the region. The map here on your right is a depiction of all of the different member projects that are active within the network, which I'll go into a little bit more than the specifics of the Balkan route next. Alrighty. So in terms of speaking about the Balkan route, I would define it as a series of both clandestine and in some moments formalized routes throughout the Balkan region that people on the move have used to attempt to cross from parts of the MENA region, Southern Europe, into Northern, Western, and Central Europe. These routes have shifted and changed over time in response to geopolitical changes, the militarization and securitization of certain borders, and other factors. Since 2015, the Balkan route has figured prominently within European discourses on migration as more people were trying to kind of travel this particular route or these routes, but also as a space in which humanitarian responses were being implemented and systemic human rights abuses were being perpetrated in connection often with the securitization and militarization of borders. So the map on your left is from our online database of pushbacks, and the little circles show the spaces or the locations in which we have records of pushbacks occurring throughout the region. Again, we're active in collecting firsthand testimonies of pushbacks and working with survivors from the Greek-Turkish border up through Croatia, Slovenia, Bosnia. The map on your right, just to describe briefly, shows the myriad of different routes throughout the region, again, to stress that the Balkan route is not really one, but a multiplicity of different ways people over time have tried to navigate this region. The dark red borders show the heavily militarized or fenced borders, red being the slightly more permeable borders. And then the dark black arrows show kind of the routes that are most kind of commonly taken, and the smaller arrows, the more infrequent routes. Right, so in terms of the history of the last kind of, I would say 7 years or so, in terms of this migration crisis that we've lived through since 2015. Again, we started from this point of, if you look back to 2015, moments of somewhat open mobility throughout the region. It was not in any ways completely open, but there was the possibility for people to move through with somewhat ease. This changed drastically starting in 2015 with the erection of border fences starting on the Hungarian-Serbian border and kind of major clash points on this border. And from there, kind of a progressive militarization of border regions throughout the region. This brings us to the point that we are currently, where in 2020 to 2021, BVMN has documented a kind of severe increase in some ways in pushbacks and forms of border violence that have been occurring throughout the region. Several unfolding events have kind of led to this shift. we would identify, for example, the finding issued in February of 2020 by the ECHR on the Malia case, basically where the court basically vindicated collective expulsions by EU states in some ways. And as was already mentioned, further license was given on kind of the increasing, how to say, the presence of pushbacks is something that is somewhat normalized in the context of the Greek-Turkish border in March of 2020, which colleague Eleni already mentioned. And finally, I would say one of the kind of biggest shifts that we've seen since 2020 has been the COVID-19 pandemic, right? In terms of the way armed forces started becoming more involved in issues of migration management and the kind of very troubling discourses that we saw in Greece and other places within the Balkans in connection with the COVID pandemic and migration as kind of a large shift. So in terms of looking as well at parallels between the situation in the Balkans and what we're seeing now on the Polish-Belarusian border, I pulled 3 images from different kind of clash points, right? Or like moments in the last years where there's been a surgence of people going towards a particular border region, and then also a strong response by the state. The one on your far left is from the Hungarian-Serbian border back in 2015, when Hungary decided that they would stop allowing people to transit through the country, and it led to this kind of major like point of tension at a particular border crossing in Ruski. This photo in the middle is from last year in March of 2020, when there was this crisis in the Evros region with many people trying to cross. And the last photo is from the Polish-Belarusian border. So I would say, if to taking kind of a longer view, it's quite troubling, but also interesting in the sense that we've seen kind of these moments of tension pop up quite a lot in the last years, whether it be in the Balkans, in Greece, in Poland and Belarus at the moment. And it's, I think, of interest, but also kind of concerning and troubling to see how these may be indicative of kind of broader trends in migration management within the context of Europe. Further, I think it's important to note that there may be a direct connection in some ways between what we've seen in the Balkans with regards to the militarization and securitization of borders and what's happening in Poland and Belarus. Over the summer already, we were hearing accounts from people in the Balkans who were saying things like that it was impossible to cross at this point, and we're thinking about trying to go to Belarus and Poland, or making the calculation of saying, okay, it's 35 days to go through the Balkans, but if we go to Poland and Belarus, maybe it's shorter. And the way kind of these logics figure into people's decisions on how to cross, where to cross. Of course, also in parallel with actions by the state to push people towards particular routes. And finally, I was asked to speak briefly about the concept of crisis response. Right, so what do we mean when we talk about crisis response, or the actions of different NGOs, civil society actors, when responding to issues of pushbacks, or border violence and migration issues more broadly speaking. And I would break this down a little bit into the different kind of forms of response that have happened in the Balkans in the last years. On one level, you have the response of the state, which arguably has slowly moved towards an increasingly violent approach towards people in the move. Whether you see that through, in Greece, the move towards having closed camps or detention centers as the only kind of housing option available for people on the move and asylum seekers, or in responses to the state to people on the move in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Croatia, and elsewhere. In terms of humanitarian responses to crisis, we've seen this happening on multiple levels, right? So there's the large international organizations that have come in and very much propped up the state in some ways in terms of administering to camps or kind of existing as a secondary infrastructure of support for migrants and asylum seekers. But then also, I think in the context of the Balkans, it's very important to talk about the role of small civil society actors, NGOs, self-organized and solidarity-based groups as like part of this larger landscape, and a very important, and that have played a very important role in terms of supporting people on the move, asylum seekers, migrants, in the region throughout the last years, with everything from NFI distributions to shelter to food to legal support to documentation work. And again, to maybe loop back a little bit, this is where the work of the Border Violence Monitoring Network comes in a little bit. As BVMN, we have member projects that are kind of throughout this region, right? Everywhere from the Turkish-Greek border up through Zagreb and elsewhere. And one of the interesting things has been having groups that are involved in their local context in all of these different locations at a very grassroots level and doing different things. So for example, we have some member projects that engage in NFI distributions, but others that are kind of collectives of lawyers that mainly focus on legal advocacy. And the way that from this basis of different experiences in the field and very kind of direct localized knowledge, we've been able to kind of shift into doing more documentation work and building up a presence in terms of EU and national advocacy, but grounding all of this work in kind of very practical field-based knowledge and experiences. A lot of this happens through the collection of testimonies and through having really close contact with people on the move, and intentionally having this serve as the basis then for advocacy work, whether it be meeting with EU parliamentarians or writing interventions to different UN bodies or policy analyses, these sorts of things. Let's see. I think that's all I had for today. I don't want to keep you all too long, so maybe I can stop here and we want to move into questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chloe. Thank you for great timekeeping. And now I would like to move to the second part of today's webinar, which is the roundtable. So now I will have 3 or 4 questions to all of you, and if you could just each of you or those who are volunteers, if you could just answer drawing on your experience from the countries where you're based at. So I would like to start with the problem that we are increasingly seeing nowadays in Poland, the problem of criminalization of activists. So what does it consist in, if it happens also in Greece and in the Balkan route? I mean, activists trying to help on the border. How does it happen? And what are the resistance strategies of the activists? So whoever would like to start, just speak for about a minute so that we can make sure that we can ask all the questions. Lenny or Chloe, would you like to start?
Whatever, I can go first. Well, very quickly, yes, there is an issue of criminalization of activists and criminalization of solidarity. We have seen it already happening most intensively in the islands and the search and rescue operations that have been heavily criminalized. In the Evros, it's still a kind of bullying coming from the authorities. So not yet something very concrete, but what in terms of response, because this is something that we want to focus on, what we have been trying to do is to find ways to coordinate among each other and with other organizations. So one thing is that we are now currently forming a network of recording pushback incidents under the auspices of the Greek National Commission for Human Rights, which is very important in the sense that apart that this will give a credibility to the recordings themselves, it will also provide with some kind of safety to the people recording the incidents on the ground. So it's for us, it's very important to try and resolve the issues also that way. Very briefly, trying to not take more time.
Chloe, would you like to add something from your perspective?
Sure, yeah. I mean, Eleni covered quite a lot of it already. I think it's something that we've seen kind of throughout the region. In Croatia, for example, last week, there was a verdict against a volunteer with an NGO called Are You Serious?, who is being criminalized for supporting a family that was trying to seek asylum in Croatia. And it's something that what we've seen recently, I would say in the context of Greece, but also more broadly in the Balkans, is a shift in public discourse and kind of a, whereas before maybe it would have been more not friendly, but more open to having the presence of solidarians, and there was like the atmosphere was a little bit different. What we've seen in the last years is quite a large shift, right, in terms of public discourse, but then also like the direct criminalization of groups that are active within these regions. And yeah, it's a huge issue of concern on different levels. We've been working to try to see what can be done in terms of supporting those that are being criminalized and building up stronger kind of networks of support. Yeah, because I mean, as the lady said, it does quite often amount to bullying in some ways, or it's something that is without kind of any clear basis in terms of the law, or it seems very much something meant to discourage people from being present within these regions and continuing with their work.
Yes, and Witold and Marta, would you like to speak a little bit about this topic, especially in the light of today's or last night's events, what happened on the Polish border?
Yes, sure. We also see increasing attempts to criminalize the humanitarian assistance which is provided at the border. What we do is we try to legally challenge each act of harassment, intimidation, or whatever the authorities are doing to prevent us from providing this assistance. We have a network of lawyers cooperating with us who are helping here. And we try to coordinate these actions. There is a solidarity among the NGOs, groups, activists, people working at the border, which is very helpful in situations like this one. But I see that we're taking only the first steps now, since the situation is quite new here in Poland. So it remains to be seen what the outcome of these proceedings will be.
And maybe only add that the government mostly use the violence and put the violence against activists. There has not been for a moment much charges formulated and some real legal action taken by the government. So we do have some cases, but they are really only a few and the very beginning stage. So we will see if it will grow on that note. So what kind of strategy the government will take? Just harassment or putting some people addressing some charges against several people?
And would you like to elaborate on what happened to the Polish Catholic Intelligence Club last night? Would you like to say a little bit about what happened last night?
I mean, I said something in my presentation. I mean, there was a riot. The police, there several police officers with guns just arrived at the very evening at their doorsteps. They entered the premises, they searched the premises, they confiscated some tools like computers and phones. They interrogated people who were there. So that the interrogations took the whole night. No charges for now has been formulated, and probably no one will, because there was nothing illegal there. So in terms of law, it was really difficult to formulate any serious criminal charges against people who were there.
Or distributing the blankets to people in need in the forests.
Yeah. Another question that I would like to ask, I already asked Witek and Marta about the stance of the supranational institutions such as the European Union, but here I would like to add the free organizations about your experience with Frontex, and what's your opinion about Frontex activities in Greece and in the Balkan regions as well? Because just to give you a little bit of introduction, Frontex has not been asked by the Polish authorities to intervene on the Polish-Belarusian border. So the question is, what is your opinion on Frontex activities in the countries that you observe?
Do you want me to go first, maybe, since I started the last one? So Frontex has been present in Greece, like in the borders, for quite a few years now. They are keeping some kind of distance, let's say, from the pushback operations, in the sense of media representation, etc. Although, and this has to be recorded in the testimonies that we are getting from people that have been pushed back to Turkey. There are several times testimonies about agents, paramilitary agents, also speaking languages other than Greek, which in such heavily militarized border zone could only point to Frontex. And this is something that we have been reporting heavily. It's not that frequent, but it is present there. So this is an issue that one has to consider. Although, and I don't know if you're aware of this, this news, which is quite surreal in a sense. Just last week, Frontex themselves filed an appeal to the Greek ombudsman, because allegedly their interpreter has been pushed back to Turkey by Greek forces. So I know this sounds surreal or something, but in general, from then on, we have seen an even more intensified movement of Frontex distanciating themselves from the pushback operations, although we are not at all persuaded that they are not part of it. And of course, we are totally persuaded that they are aware of it all these years.
Maybe to add on to that. So agreed for the most part. There was one instance, I think it was in May of last year, where a Frontex vessel in the Aegean was documented participating in a pushback as well in Greece. And if we speak about the rest of the Balkans, I think it's been a topic of concern for a long time, as they are present in many of the border regions. The complicating factor a little bit is this kind of metric of what is considered hard evidence, right? So we have so many different testimonies that document the presence of officers that speak languages other than the ones of the countries that the pushback is happening from, or descriptions of the light blue armband that most Frontex officers wear. But in order to publish a full investigation on the topic or come out with a very strong allegation of Frontex is involved in this pushback, we have been lacking kind of the hard evidence or the video footage, for example, to be able to make this claim directly. And this has been one of the kind of the largest stumbling blocks in terms of doing advocacy around this particular topic. The other thing that maybe adds complication to this topic within the context of the Balkans is bilateral agreements between different nation states. So on some border regions, you'll have Frontex officers present in addition to national border guards and police forces, but then also maybe police officers and border guards from other nation states that are there as part of some bilateral agreement. So the landscape itself of the border can be a bit complicated in terms of which kind of units might be present, which officers are potentially aware of what's happening in terms of the pushbacks or directly participating in them. And it's a puzzle that we're trying to untangle a little bit at the moment, but has proven to be time consuming, to say the least.
Can I ask something? Because I mean, I think it's a picture of the biggest problem of the EU and European Commission and how they behave against the crisis, constant crisis on the European borders, and how distant are they, and how much it endorses the local governments, and it's the Polish example is very significant here. I mean, how the European Commission copied the narratives using the military language, repeat on and consist on repeating how endangered we are in the EU, how migrants attacked us, and so on and so forth. So I think it's like the biggest problem of the completely ununderstandable European policy against migration, fencing the borders, trying to harder people's lives, lost lives on the border, and agreeing on that situation, which is not coincidental. It's actually forced by the EU, by their policy. I mean, it's my opinion, but it shows that this picture is really broad, and this is part of the broader European policy, or lack of the policy, actually, lack of the idea how to deal with migration issues in the long term.
Yeah, and my last question for this roundtable part is, about the sense of what we are doing today, that we are meeting with colleagues from Greece and the Balkan Road. What kind of transnational solidarity can be worked out? How can a part of exchanging experiences, what we are doing today, how can we work together to really to support each other?
I think if I may begin again, it is very important, apart from the exchange of information, to try and network also in order to showcase that these kind of incidents are incidents that are happening across the borders, and that this showcase that these are also EU policies that are being implemented. This is very, very important in the sense that even when I was speaking, I heard myself kind of talking into the narrative of scapegoating the Greek government, where in fact what is being implemented by the Greek government in the borders right now is an EU policy. So the EU through the Greek government is implementing this kind of policy, and the EU through the Polish government that's my opinion, that this is implementing what is being implemented now in the borders. So in this sense, it is very important to network among each other, and to try and show the extent, the bigger image of the EU policy that is being at stake right now.
If I may, that's what I was also thinking. Actually, it's the EU issue, not only the national issue here. And what we can do together for sure is to challenge this EU policies at the EU level together. So what we see is this proposal of the European Commission or any other documents that were introduced in the last years. These are the documents that would affect the situation at the EU's borders. So that's definitely there's definitely a room for cooperation among organizations working at the external EU borders, no matter what the country are from, because like we are seeing, there are a lot of similarities and the same patterns that the countries are using to conduct these illegal practices, which are in fact the practices that are supported or even encouraged by the EU.
I would add to that we need to find a common language and a common narrative, actually, that will contravene the EU narrative, the EU policy. And if we are managed to do that, I think we could become very powerful in that to convince our societies that there is something wrong with the policy, the current policy, that it shouldn't go this way, because now that the fear was created, so we kind of should manage the and mitigate the fear within society, or redirect it somehow, because it's difficult to work against fear, but we could probably redirect it and change the narrative about migration and asylum seekers, asylum seeking as an issue.
Agreed on almost all points. And I would only just add that also in terms of sharing skills and kind of the knowledge that we've each built up in our individual contexts, this is something where, like, the more we can share this in ways where if there's, okay, today it's the Polish-Belarusian border, tomorrow it's somewhere else, but to make sure that the groups that are on the ground there start off with the basis of knowledge from people that have been doing this work already. And then collectively, maybe we get closer to a point where we find a way to deal with this in the end, or a more kind of comprehensive, coherent response down the line.
Yes, sure. And what you were talking today during your presentations, I can also see like a lot of parallels and a lot of common ground also to share knowledge. For instance, when you, Chloe, said about people who on the Balkan route said it's so difficult already in the summer, it's better to go to Poland through Belarus. It's like, and the Polish government was totally surprised, but you wouldn't be surprised because you already knew what was going to happen because you were hearing the people on the ground. Yes, and also I think that the websites of your organizations, how you collect testimonies, how you prepare your monthly reports, it's really impressive, and it's also a ground to learn from. and congratulations on this. And Eleni, your organization, Human Rights 360, you in your recent report, you also refer to the situation on the Polish-Belarusian border, and that's very much appreciated because there are many parallels. But I would like to move now to the questions from our public. We have collected a lot of questions, and I have grouped them according to the topics that our public would like us to answer. And obviously, because of the organizer of this roundtable today, a lot of questions about Polish situation. So colleagues from Greece and Balkan, my apologies for this. The first question.
We are also mostly interested in the Polish situation, to be honest. So please go ahead.
Okay, so I will start with a question about the incentives, and it's a question from Tatiana Shaban, who is a researcher from Canada. And Tatiana would like to know what makes people come to Belarus, who advertises Belarus as a point of crossing to the EU, where migrants get visas from, and who issues them, what airlines take them to Belarus, etc. What can be done to prevent and stop it? So let's start shortly with this question, and then we will follow with a different topic.
Okay, I may start, and then Vitek will add something to that. So already by now we have quite extensive research done, mostly by journalists, about the migration route to Belarus. And there was actually very recently published an article on the connections between the travel agencies that were operating or are still operating in Iraq and Syria and other countries with Belarusian officials. So that's definitely something that, like we said at the beginning, was orchestrated by Belarusians. The travel agencies were opened by people who are very closely connected to Belarusian authorities. And they were offering these visas to people, like I'm saying, mostly from the countries that are very likely to, well, it's not easy to get visas for these people, and for them, usually there was no other way to get to Europe. We collected testimonies of a lot of people who actually were wishing to join their families who are already living somewhere in the EU countries. So for them, it was a way to travel to EU and to seek here for protection. But on the officially, what we see on the documents that were drafted, like the contracts between these travel agencies and migrants, were some tourist activities that they paid for. So like seeing Minsk, or like going for hunting. That's actually one of the recent document that was investigated and researched by the journalists. Actually, and this is what the Human Rights Watch reports show, because the researchers were able to go to Belarus and talk to migrants who were already in Minsk. Most of the people whom they talked to did not expect what actually would be happening at the border. So they would not expect the harsh conditions. They would not expect that this would be like this political game between two countries from which neither would like to accept them. They would not expect that they would have to stay there for days or weeks, being pushed back from one place to another with no way out, so with no possibility to go back to Minsk or to their countries of origin. So like I'm saying, it was like a trap. So it was advertised as an easy way to enter Europe, to join their families, or to seek for protection. But it turned out for them to be a death trap from which there was no way out. There were already sanctions imposed by the EU recently on some of the airlines and some of the people involved in this business. But probably there is still we still don't know the whole network of people who were involved in this. And what's like the most disturbing here, because I mean, giving people a chance to travel to Europe if they have no other way to get into Europe, it's one thing, but then giving them a false picture about what's happening here, and then treating them very violently and brutally at the border, forcing them to cross the border, torturing them, depriving them of shelter and of food and access to medical assistance, this is another thing. And that's the crimes that we are seeing at the border on the Belarusian side, and these are the crimes that we are documenting right now. Vitek, maybe you want to add something.
I would like to continue with a really set of questions from our public about the current situation. How is the current situation? So here I've grouped questions from Cory Hanke, who is a journalist for the Belgian newspaper De Standaard, also from Femke from Dutch Council of Refugees, and from Maria, who is from Border Group in Lithuania. So they would like to know, how is the situation now? How many people are stuck in the border zone at the moment? Obviously, we can only give estimates because of the situation. And about this situation, the question is as well, at this point, in this current situation, how close to the border can activists, medics come? This is the question from Maria. How many people have been returned to their countries of origin, and how many of them are in detention centers? So if you could answer at least some of these questions about the current situation.
So maybe Marta, would you like to? I mean, of course it's difficult to present any numbers there, especially for I mean, not only in Polish side, but especially on the Belarusian side, because no one has access to the territory actually. So we what we know, that situation is the same, like it was more or less the same, well, like it was a month ago or 2 months ago, especially when it comes to the Polish part of the border. So we're still in this pseudo state of exception, as we call it. So we still can't approach the border with the 3-kilometer zone, no go area at the border. No one could enter. There are some exceptions for journalists, but they're fake actually, and not effective at all.
But what do you mean by fake?
Fake because the journalist could enter for a special time in a special place, being accompanied all the way by the border guards, actually being driven by the border guards in their car, so they can't go there by their own. And at the very beginning, they receive a training, which is kind of brainwashing by the border guards, how they should perceive the situation. So that's why it's fake, because it's not a free access to the border zone and reporting on the situation there. When it comes to the number of the people and trapped at the border, we estimate that it's like up to 5,000 people on the Belarusian side, but it's rough estimation, so no one knows exactly how many people are entrapped there. Some new people are still coming. So we met several people that who came quite recently to Belarus, but the number has been dropped dramatically. So there is much less border crossings at the border, but still the people are there. And we still find some people in the forest hiding from Polish border, from Polish authorities.
Maybe if I can add one thing to that, after the diplomatic actions of some Western politicians, not Polish ones, but it was Macron and Merkel who talked to Lukashenko and Putin, there were some return flights organized by Belarus to Iraq. It's again very hard to report on that without having like the real access to the reliable data, as we cannot really rely on the data provided by Belarus. What's here very worrying is that people that are returned to Iraq might not have access to real asylum and proper asylum proceedings and return proceedings in Belarus. And because, as we know, the asylum system here there is not effective. So here there are also concerns that people right now are being returned to Iraq from Belarus, but with no due process and without the possibility to actually enter the asylum proceeding.
Another set of questions is about the changes. What has happened, what has changed so that the situation on the Polish border is so exceptional? So Özlem Burakar from the University of Oslo is asking, could you please expand a bit on the amendments made to the Polish law to facilitate speed expulsions? What do they entail? Are you aware of similar amendments in Latvia or in Lithuania? We also have people from Lithuania in the public, so feel free also to answer in chat. And also speaking about the changes, Izabela Kujawa from the University of Adam Mickiewicz in Poznań would like to ask Witold if you could all elaborate a bit on why do you want you would not classify what has been happening on the Polish-Belarusian border as pushbacks. And the final question about the changes is a question about changes in the discourse. So Magdalena Wnuk would like to know, what about the national narrative of the war and defending the borders against evil from Russia? It is not a part of the direct EU narrative, at least not in all EU countries. The language and meanings of this national narrative in Poland are different. How to deal with this problem, that many people believe migrants are some kind of forecast of war?
Maybe I can answer the first one and then leave the rest of them to Vitek. So when it comes to legal changes, so there was first this legal amendment introduced in August, allowing actually under the COVID restrictions or the COVID provisions to escort the person back to the borderline if the person crossed the border in an irregular manner, which the border guards was using to take people back to the border with Belarus with no legal proceedings whatsoever being launched in this process. So it meant that people were just, like I was saying before, taken to the military trucks or to the border guard cars, no matter where exactly they were found and apprehended. It could be, 1 kilometer from the border, but also, 10 kilometers from the border, or even, like in the big city, somewhere in Poland, far from the border. They would be taken to these cars and taken back to the borderline, and then forced to cross this razor wire fence and go back to Belarus. Then in October, there was this legislation, the bill that was passed by the parliament and then signed by the president, that allowed for issuing the decision. So now this would be or should be the proceeding initiated against each person that is crossing the border in an irregular manner, but with no legal or no procedural guarantees anticipated in this provision, which means that basically it's just very short decision in which it's written that the person crossed the border illegally and then should be returned with no access to lawyer, no access to any assistance, because there is no time for that. It happens very quickly, and then the person is escorted back. Like I'm saying, even if the appeal is submitted, it has no suspensive effect. The problem here is not only with the law, which, like I'm saying, it's contrary to the both national and international, including the EU law on the right to asylum, on the right to due process. It's contrary to Return Directive, which is introducing these procedural guarantees. But also what we see on the ground is that even now, after this change was introduced, still most of the people don't even get this decision. They're being pushed back just like before, so with no legal proceedings, not even this decision that was that I mentioned. So this is how the situation looks like right now. The problem is with this kind of law that, as you know, we have an ongoing rule of law crisis in Poland. So there is no real way of challenging this law in front of the Constitutional Tribunal. The EU EU could launch an infringement proceeding, and actually this is what I think should be done in this situation, because the law is clearly in violation of the EU law.
So when it comes to the terminology, I mean, it's, I do know that what is coming, what's happening in Poland, it is a pushback, but I kind of refuse to use the term for various reasons. First of all, because we are often, I mean, the European Commission and European Union, we're often softening the language of what is going on. That the new term that was proposed recently or is implementing recently by Frontex is redirection. So we really losing the track of what is going on. It's not a pushback, it's not redirection. There are really expulsion with a harsh violence. They're employed by and deployed by European Union's officers and in the name of us as a European society. So I think it is one reason that the language is the expulsion more or less shows what is going on. More or less also because especially when you see in Polish cases, what is going on there, it's not on the border area. People are apprehended several kilometers from the border. The farthest case that we know was happened in Warsaw. People were catched in Warsaw, drove to the border, and then expelled at the border. So there is no connection to the border area whatsoever, in most of the cases. And there is also, in pushbacks are not legal terms, but collective expulsion are. So we could also refer to some legal terms and some legal provisions and the language of human rights. So it's another reason that I think that this language is much more, much better. We should apply instead of pushback, which is really vague, neutral, and not very bad as a term. It doesn't click well with people's mind, because they don't see the severity of the situation. In Polish case, also of the collectivity of the expulsion. That it's not one person that faces it, but usually people in group, and they are really expelled, pushed back actually in groups through the border. And when it comes
Wojtek, just for the Polish listeners, like we use the term wywózka in Polish, which is actually probably better describing what's the situation. So like violently taking a person from one place to another, and it's actually associated with the very dark times in Polish history.
And further on the narrative, I think that the war language or the military language and the war between Russia and Poland is the same, like Eleni said at the Greek-Turkey border. The only difference is who is the enemy. Here will be in Poland. In Russia, Russia in Greek situation, it would be a Turkey. So the language is more or less the same. You need to find a threat, a bad guy behind that, and then the language remains completely the same, but in the essence. That's why I think that the term hybrid war, as Eleni also refers to, so the language is more or less really the same. And as we could see there in the Polish case, the involvement of Russia into this situation shows that there need to be some scary and bad guy behind that, because the Belarus is not so scary. So we don't have, and I don't think we don't have any proofs that Russia is really involved in the situation on the border. But nevertheless, some politicians brought the and put those terms and bring Russia here as an actor, as actually ones who orchestrated all of that, without any evidence that it's really happening. So it's mostly to scare people, in my opinion.
Yes, thank you. And I think it's what you also said previously, that it's so important to find a common language is really pivotal, because we, for instance, as the example of pushback shows, it's the massive pushbacks are not only the problem in Poland, it's also the problem on the Balkan route. And this is something that the testimonies collected by the Border Violence Monitoring Network also shows, with expulsions as massive as of 120 people. So, so definitely this exchanging of experiences is really important, also to speak the same language and use similar terminology. Now it's 4:34 in Warsaw. So with this, I'm afraid we have to finish our roundtable. I'm sorry about not asking each of the questions, but we will be saving the chat, and we will pass the questions to our speakers. Some of you popped in your email addresses. Thank you for this. And hopefully we will be exchanging experiences. We had a nice participation of over 80 people at the peak point. So thank you very much to all the participants. Thank you very much for all the listeners, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you for organizing the whole event.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Same here.
Bye-bye.
Bye.